The doors closed on their own. The rooms changed when I looked away. And then I found his message, "Read only when you're ready." I wasn't. I still remember the exact moment I realized my life had turned into something I couldn't possibly explain. The letter was sitting on my kitchen table, in one of those official-looking cream envelopes with a heavy watermark and a seal I didn't recognize. I tore it open, hands shaking slightly, and the words hit me like a punch I hadn't been ready for. "You have been named the sole heir to the estate of Mr. Alastair Wyndham, late of Wellington Manor." I froze, the envelope slipping from my fingers. Wellington Manor. The name sounded like something out of a Victorian ghost story, not a place I was supposed to own. And Alastair Wyndham? I'd never heard of him. Not in passing. Not in a conversation. I can't even tell you if I had read his name somewhere. It was just absent from my life until that exact second. The letter explained that Mr. Wyndham had passed away a few months ago, leaving his entire estate to me. A lawyer's number was scribbled at the bottom, a kind of lifeline if I had questions. The whole thing smelled like a scam at first, but the lawyer's office was real. The case number was real. And apparently, the mansion itself was very real, too. I didn't know what to do. I called my best friend, Jen, who is the kind of person who makes everything sound reasonable, even when it's completely insane. "Are you serious?" she asked after the lawyer explained everything to me over the phone. "A mansion? Like your mansion? You've never met this guy?" "Yes." "Never. I don't even know why he'd leave it to me," I muttered, pacing my tiny apartment like a caged animal. "And I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with it. I've never owned anything bigger than my car." The first night, I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Mansion layouts, legal obligations, taxes, ghosts maybe, or worse, eccentric distant relatives who might pop out of the woodwork. I kept imagining a giant, shadow-filled house on a hill, full of creaking floors and rooms I wouldn't dare enter. But the next morning, I called a cab and decided to see it for myself. The drive out there was long. The roads twisted into hills and finally opened into a clearing where the mansion sat like it had always been waiting for me. Even from a distance, the house was massive. Ivy climbed the stone walls in chaotic patterns, windows glinting in the sunlight like sharp, knowing eyes. A wrought iron gate, rusted in places, creaked when I pushed it open. When I stepped inside, I felt like I'd walked into a dream, or a memory that wasn't mine. The air smelled faintly of old wood and lavender polish. Dust motes floated in the beams of sunlight streaming through enormous windows. The furniture was ornate, some of it clearly antique. Portraits of stern-looking men and women lined the walls, their eyes following me wherever I went. And yet, it was silent. So painfully silent that it made my stomach twist. I explored for hours. I found a library with shelves towering past the ceiling, a music room with a grand piano that hadn't been played in decades, and a kitchen that felt like it belonged in a different century. There were letters, diaries, and ledgers scattered in drawers, all written in Mr. Wyndham's precise hand. I couldn't stop looking at them, even though I had no right to. Some pages hinted at a life full of secrets, arrangements I didn't understand, and people whose names meant nothing to me. I spent the first night in the mansion in a guest room, which was smaller than the others but still the size of my old apartment. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the broken shutters, felt like someone, or something, was moving through the halls, observing me. And then I found it, a small locked drawer in Mr. Wyndham's study with a note on top. It said, "For the one who comes after me. Read only when you are ready." I didn't know if I was ready, but I couldn't resist. I picked the lock with trembling hands. Inside was a single envelope, and in it, a letter addressed to me, written in the same precise hand as all the diaries. "I know this will be confusing. You don't know me, and I don't know you. But something about you needed this house more than anyone else. It will change you. It will test you. Be careful whom you trust, and pay attention to the whispers of the walls. They speak if you listen. Not everyone here is as absent as they seem. A.W." I reread it a dozen times, each pass making my head spin. What the hell did he mean? Whispers of the walls. Not everyone here is as absent as they seem. My life had just been rewritten overnight, and I had no idea how to process it. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a puzzle, a living, breathing thing with secrets stitched into its walls. And somehow, someway, it was mine. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I wasn't leaving. I didn't know what I was walking into, or how it would change me, but leaving wasn't an option anymore. I had to know why. I had to know who Alastair Wyndham was, and why, out of everyone in the world, he chose me. And maybe, just maybe, I had to survive the house itself. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the tall, ornate windows. It wasn't a gentle patter, more like tiny fists, impatiently demanding attention. I lay in the grand four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that I hadn't even unpacked. The night before, I'd fallen into the strange rhythm of the house. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every shadowed corner making my skin prickle. I got up, wrapped myself in a robe that smelled faintly of cedar from the dresser drawers, and wandered into the hallway. There was a draft, cold and cutting, moving like it had its own agenda. The portraits along the walls seemed more alive in the daylight. Eyes sharper, judging, curious. I felt like I was intruding, like a character in someone else's story. I wanted to retreat, but something, a mix of stubbornness and curiosity, kept me moving. Breakfast was in the kitchen. Or, at least, the kitchen I assumed I could call that. It was enormous, with copper pots hanging from a wrought iron rack, and a long wooden table polished to a dull shine. I opened the cupboards to find old china, dusted with decades of neglect. I poured myself some juice, orange, surprisingly fresh, and sat at the table. The silence was thick, almost tangible, and I realized I didn't want to break it. After eating, I decided to explore the attic. The stairwell was narrow, the steps groaning under my weight, and the light from my phone barely made a dent in the gloom. The air smelled like dust, mold, and a hint of something else, something metallic, almost like blood. My heart rate spiked, but I kept going. The attic was a labyrinth of old furniture, trunks, and forgotten memories. One trunk in particular caught my attention. It was made of dark oak, iron-bound, and looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1940s. I knelt down and opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, and journals belonging to people I didn't recognize. Faces stared up at me from black and white photos, eyes filled with longing, fear, and something unspoken. Then I found a small key taped to the bottom of the trunk. It was delicate, brass, and oddly warm in my hand. There was no note, no explanation, just the key, like it was waiting for me. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. As I descended, the house seemed to shift around me. Shadows stretched longer, corners deepened, and the air grew heavier. I realized I had been thinking about the letter from Mr. Wyndham constantly, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle piece I couldn't fit. Why me? Why now? What did he see in me that I didn't see in myself? By late afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy. I wandered into the study, still haunted by that first note. I found a locked drawer in the massive desk, the same one I had unlocked the night before, and slid the brass key into the lock. It fit perfectly. Inside was a collection of documents and a small leather-bound book. The documents were legal, property records mostly, but one page made my stomach twist. It was a ledger of people who had worked for the house over the decades, some of them disappearing mysteriously. Names crossed out, dates scribbled in a frantic hand. The book was a diary, written by Mr. Wyndham himself. I opened it hesitantly, the pages smelling like smoke and old paper. He wrote about the house as if it were alive, describing its moods, its secrets, its inhabitants that were not always human. I laughed nervously, shaking my head, but then I read a passage that made me freeze. The house chooses. It has always chosen. And it has chosen you now. Listen carefully. The walls speak, but only if you truly hear. Do not trust the servants blindly, they remember more than they say. And beware of the rooms that are not meant to be entered. I closed the diary, heart hammering. The house choosing me. The walls speaking. I wanted to dismiss it, of course. But the sensation in the air, the subtle hum, the way the shadows seemed to linger just a second too long, made me pause. Maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe there was something alive in this place that I couldn't see. Dinner was a quiet affair. I cooked something simple in the vast kitchen, using ingredients I had bought from a small town on the way. I ate alone, listening to the wind sigh through the broken shutters. And then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper from the hall. At first, I thought I imagined it. The house was full of noises, after all, every floorboard, every creaking beam, every draft making its own language. But then it came again. A soft, deliberate murmur. A single word. Welcome. My stomach flipped. I wanted to run, to flee back to my small apartment and pretend none of this had ever happened. But some stubborn part of me, a part one didn't even know existed, made me stay. I whispered back, almost without thinking, Who's there? Silence. Then, a door at the end of the hall creaked open. A faint light spilled from within, warm and golden. And I knew, in a way I couldn't explain, that my life had just crossed a line. There was no going back. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a test, a puzzle, a living thing with its own will. And I, inexplicably, was the one chosen to enter its deepest secrets. I spent the night in the study, reading the diary by candlelight, trying to piece together what kind of person Alastair Wyndham had been. Some entries spoke of joy, of beauty, of love for the estate. Others hinted at fear, paranoia, obsession. And through it all, a strange tenderness for the one who would inherit it. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the heavy curtains, I realized that this mansion, these walls, the whispers, they weren't just history. They were alive, waiting. And I had stepped into a story I didn't understand, one I couldn't escape, and one that would, somehow, change me forever. The morning air was thick with fog, curling around the mansion like fingers trying to pull me back inside. I should have been scared, and maybe I was, but there was also a strange exhilaration. I had survived the first night, and now it was time to see what else the house had in store. I started in the west wing, the part of the mansion that had always been closed off, or at least that I had avoided instinctively. The walls there were darker, the air heavier, like it carried memory, decades of secrets and silences. I ran my hand along the paneling, noticing how the wood seemed almost warm, pulsing faintly under my fingers. It was absurd. I knew it was absurd. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was aware I was here. That it was watching me. I found a small study tucked behind a set of sliding doors. The room smelled of dust and old ink. Papers littered the floor, and a single chair sat facing the window. On the desk was a note, written in the same handwriting I had begun to recognize everywhere in the mansion. Alastair Wyndham's. The answers you seek are not in the light, but in the corners where shadows linger. Do not fear what is hidden. The house has chosen you for a reason. I sank into the chair, suddenly exhausted, and tried to process everything. The diary, the letters, the whispers, the locked rooms, it was too much. And yet, I felt a strange sense of belonging. Like I had been waiting for this, even though I didn't know it. Hours passed. I wandered through the house aimlessly, touching the furniture, peering into closets, listening to the creaks and sighs. Every now and then, a door would close on its own, or I would hear the soft padding of footsteps behind me, but when I turned, no one was there. Then I found the portrait room. Every wall was covered in paintings of the Wyndham family, some of whom looked remarkably like me. I stared at them, heart hammering, and realized something. These were not just ancestors. They were echoes. Memories, perhaps, trapped in paint and canvas. The eyes followed me with familiarity, not hostility, and a chill ran down my spine. One portrait, smaller and more modest than the rest, caught my attention. A man with a gentle smile, eyes soft but knowing. He held a key in his hand, the same brass key I had found in the attic. And I understood, suddenly, that this was Alastair. He had been waiting for me in a way, preparing for me to arrive. The house seemed to breathe around me, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt chosen. The walls whispered encouragement, the shadows pointed the way forward, and the secrets of the mansion no longer seemed menacing. They seemed alive, waiting for me to understand them, to take my place in a story that was far larger than my previous life. That evening, I found a hidden passage behind a bookshelf in the library. It was narrow, dust-filled, and smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I hesitated, hand on the handle, and then stepped inside. The passage twisted and turned, opening into a room I had never seen in the house. It was a sitting room, cozy but clearly untouched for decades. A fire crackled in the hearth, though no one had lit it. On a small table was a tea set, perfectly arranged, and a note. Welcome home. You are the steward now. Listen to the house. Trust its memory. And remember, this place chooses wisely, and it has chosen you. I sank into the chair, letting the fire warm my frozen hands, and for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. The mansion wasn't just a puzzle or a mystery. It wasn't an inheritance I needed to manage. It was a living, breathing entity, and I was a part of it now. Days blurred into nights as I explored every corner, read every diary, and listened to every whisper. I discovered rooms filled with forgotten treasures, letters revealing love affairs and betrayals, and journals documenting lives that had intertwined with the house for generations. And through it all, I realized something essential. I had been chosen not because I deserved it, but because I was ready, or at least, willing, to listen. I began writing my own notes, leaving them in the drawers, tucked behind books, hoping that one day, someone else might find them. Notes that whispered the same guidance I had received. Notes that would guide the next person chosen by the house. It hasn't been easy. I've had moments of fear, nights when the whispers turned sharp and accusing, and times when I doubted my own sanity. But I've also felt awe, curiosity, and a profound sense of connection, to the house, to Alastair Wyndham, and to the lives that came before me. Owning the mansion didn't just change my reality. It changed me. I see the world differently now. In shadows, in whispers, in the spaces between ordinary life. I've inherited more than a building. I've inherited a responsibility, a mystery, and a life that stretches far beyond what I ever imagined for myself. And though I still don't know why Alastair Wyndham chose me, I think I understand one thing. Some gifts aren't given for comfort or convenience. They're given to transform you, whether you're ready or not.